talking quite a bit. When I'm teaching, it's not quite as noisy.
We just saw you walk by, I think.
Yeah.
I thought the next thing to do was come right up on the window. But as I got to that window, I saw you moving around.
Yeah, we noticed you coming. Yeah, actually, that window's, but that one's behind the TV. We wouldn't see you there. Yeah. Anyway, we're in the room. Air conditioner's going because, that's
right.
Florida for you. And it is time to get to work on a new Masechet of Mishnah. Masechet is like a particular topic book in Seder Nashim, which is the section of the Mishnah that deals with women issues. Now, that is a total misnomer because it's an issue it's a section of the Mishnah that deals with many different types of issues, but that happens to be the title of this one portion of the Mishnah. This evening, however, and for the next few weeks, I imagine, we'll be dealing with an issue that does concern men and women very, very intimately, namely marriage, because we're going to be in Ketubot.
Which is after Ketubot?
What's that?
That's a reference to Ketubot?
That is indeed a reference to the Ketubah. So before we get into Ketubot, we're going to have to do a little basic framing because there are certain aspects of Jewish marriage that the Mishnah assumes you already know. And there are also certain aspects of Jewish marriage that are different now than they were 2,000 years ago. And so we're going to have to clear up a few of those things. So the first thing is the Ketubah. The Ketubah is often described wrongly by many lay people today as being a marriage contract. It is not. The Ketubah is actually a prenuptial agreement in the case of divorce or death of the husband. So let me set the stage for the problem in the ancient world. Imagine you are a woman. For some of you, that's easier to imagine. And you are growing up. You grew up on your father's estate. And your father's family has an obligation to provide for you, to care for you. That's what family does. But at a certain point, you're going to get married. And when you get married, you would leave your father's estate and you'd move to your husband's estate. And I say estate because most of the people lived on the land. Most people were farmers. And that meant that the primary means of wealth and of property was actual landed property. That was passed. Is there someone else?
Here often looks like maybe the Tom.
Oh, good. Then they can open the door for each other. Yeah. That means land was passed father to son, in order that the land would remain within the tribe, the different tribes of Israel. And that meant that for a woman, you were in a bit of a sticky position. If your husband dies, you don't inherit from him. In fact, the presumption would be you would return to your father's home. Or if your father had passed away, your brother's home. Or if you had no brother, your uncle's home. You would find the nearest male relative who you would then return to. And whatever was built by your husband would be his, or rather his heirs, or his family's. Now, his heirs could be your children, in which case they may want to support you, we hope, or his heirs could be children from a different wife, at which point we would not expect them necessarily to want to support the other wife of the deceased husband. Also, if the children were of minor age, unlike in a modern American setting, there was no presumption that a child that had been weaned needed its mother. These were multi-generational homes. There were always plenty of men and women in every household. And therefore, if you had been the wife and you had given birth to a child and the child had already been weaned, and then the husband dies, you leave, and the kid stays with the household. The kid would stay with the father's estate. The kid would not come with you because the kid stays with his inheritance. And his inheritance is his father's property. So if you're a woman, you're probably beginning to think, this doesn't sound like such a great deal. Because that means I can be married to a guy, we can live for 30 years, and he dies before me. And I don't get to inherit anything that we built together. I don't get to be taken care of at all by his other heirs if they're not my own kids. And if they're even minors, I have to say goodbye to my kids. That's a little rough. And yes, you might be living down the street, or you could be living in a whole other town. and that's pretty much goodbye. Add to this, what happens if you wake up one day and your husband decides he doesn't want to be married to you anymore? Well, according to the Torah, the husband can send you away, can divorce you. And we see that that's written through a document known as a get. But in the basic laws of the Torah, thank you very much. We've had a lovely time together. Out. That's all that's necessary. The sages said, okay, the Torah says the woman doesn't inherit from the husband when he dies. The Torah says that a husband can divorce his wife when he feels like it. That had been debated a little bit, but essentially that was the general opinion. This seems like a really bad deal for women. And more to the point, is Yarach coming?
Yes.
And more to the point, women don't want to get married, right? Because at least with your home family, the one you grew up with, you know you've pretty much got a, yep, coming, just a minute. You know that with your home family, you've pretty much got guaranteed support by being there. So why would you give that up for the chance to be married to someone who could end up divorcing you and leaving you penniless, or who could end up dying, leaving you penniless? Sounds like a legitimate problem? Okay, great. The rabbis agreed this is a legitimate problem, and they decided to step in. Before I point out what they did to fix this problem, I should point out that if you are reading through the Bible, you will notice very, very often that the Torah or other parts of the Tanakh will talk about the most vulnerable. They will talk about the stranger, and they will talk about the orphan, and they will talk about the widow, right? Because sometimes widows, sometimes women would be left behind by their husband who had passed, and they wouldn't have anywhere else to go, and they wouldn't inherit from him. So now they're really left with nothing. And so widows became a paradigm for being a person who was left without any means of support. But the rabbis wanted to fix that. The rabbis wanted to fix that. And so they instituted the practice known as the Ketubot. And the Ketubot is a prenuptial agreement that says, if I die before you, the husband speaking to the wife, you will receive X amount of money, right? A lump sum that would be given upon the husband's death from the top of his estate. That is to say, it's not after he's paid off every other debt, but the widow has the first claim on any of the property of the estate, including over and above his heirs. And also, if I divorce you, you will receive that same amount. So now if the husband wants to divorce his wife, there is a financial penalty from his point of view and financial security from her point of view for going through that process of divorce. But for the ketubah to work, as we're going to see in some of the other discussions, probably tonight, there had to be good faith in the arrangement between the husband and wife. There couldn't have been deceptions going into the marriage, and there couldn't be other issues while married that would allow the court to say the ketubah had been canceled, and which would mean that the woman could be divorced and no payment would need to be made. But we'll cover some of those cases as we go on. But the basic normal situation would be that once the rabbis instituted the ketubah as a requirement for marriage, if a husband died, she would receive a lump sum, which would be sufficient to support her for a while. And she would also receive a lump sum if there was the case of divorce. Does that make sense? Good.
Which proportion of the properties?
What we're going to see in the text, they're going to lay out a quantity that was standardized. However, technically it was negotiated. So if there was a very fine catch of a young lady, you might need to offer a ketubah that was extremely valuable, meaning A, when you die, she is going to be kept in the condition to which she is accustomed, or B, you wouldn't punish her, or you wouldn't punish her by divorcing her on a whim because the price tag would be way too high. On the other hand, someone who had more difficulty finding a match may have to settle for the minimum of a ketubah to be arranged in her place.
So in those situations, the woman cannot make your life miserable because he wanted you to divorce her. So he can obtain the land?
Absolutely. So one of the drawbacks of offering your wife a huge ketubah is she can then say, there's no way he could afford to divorce me,
Yeah.
so I can do whatever I want. Now, within the law, she can't go out and commit adultery or something, because that's still illegal.
He cannot do anything at home and say, okay, you want, do everything you.
Well,
that's it.
yes and no. There are other ways that a woman could forfeit her ketubah and give up the right to it. And the court would say, you don't have a claim to the ketubah, he can divorce you without having to pay. So we'll get into those later. So it's not 100% all the power is in her side. But it did mean that the discussion about ketubot was an important part of the marriage contract, of how people arrange this. But it is best described as a prenuptial agreement. It is not a dowry. A dowry is a European term that was used for money that the woman brought into the new married house that was given to the groom, if you will, as almost payment for taking the girl off the hands of the other family. That's not what a ketubah is. The ketubah is instead the protection that is given to a woman in case of the death of the husband or a divorce.
Who negotiated the ketubah, the bride or the parents?
Usually the ketubah would be negotiated by the parents of both sides of the family. Both bride and groom would do the negotiation, but if they were of age and they were more independent, then they could negotiate that on their own.
So these marriages were really economically driven then, huh?
Every marriage was economically driven. It doesn't matter whether we're talking about China, Africa, Europe, Middle East, North America, South America. The idea of marrying for romantic love only is a very, very modern concept. And even that, most people still do not marry just for romantic love. There is almost always still an economic element of how will we combine our labor and resources, right? Both work as well as financial or property that we already have, in order to have a more productive and better life than if we were separate. And anyone who tells you that is not involved in marriage today is probably selling like greeting cards or something. The economics of marriage is still a very important aspect. And in fact, you'll find many people will spend the bulk of their married life when they fighting about money. It's still a very important part of a happy marriage, is to be on the same page of how money is going to be handled and contributed and used and spent and all those things. So yeah, this is not like, they were worried about the economy of it. No, thank God they were worried about the economic ramifications of getting married or getting divorced or having the person die, because if you don't think about those things, that's when people suffer. Getting married for romantic reasons is great, but when he drops dead at 27 of some horrible disease, what's she supposed to do? Live on the love that he had for her? That's not going to pay her bills for food. And so having the ketubah was a physical way of showing that there was a commitment that outlasted both the love that was gone by the time of divorce or the love that was gone because the guy died. So that was a very important point, and it's actually one of the areas where the rabbis specifically used the term tikkun olam. That term gets used a lot in the modern sense as being social justice and other forms of activism. But historically, in the early days, the rabbis used the phrase tikkun olam, repairing the world, of acts that helped to redress possible imbalances within the community that needed nudging to get them in line with the values that the Torah had already taught us. So you can see how you end up getting from that to doing tikkun olam by cleaning up a beach. But it was very much a social tweaking legislation in order to make sure that society was operating the way it was meant to. We good? Okay. So with that in mind, let's get down to work. I'm not going to need to give you I guess I need one more point of introduction before we get into it. And then we're going to have another introduction on the second Mishnah. But for this one, we need one more introduction. Virginity, right? Let's just get used to saying the word virgin, because we're going to be saying it for a lot. Why was virginity such a big deal for women? Well, there were no DNA tests. There was no paternity tests. There was no way to establish who was the father of a child. Who was the mother of a child? That was easy to tell, right? There she is. Here comes the baby. I guess it's hers. No problem. But for the father, that was a bit more of an issue, which meant that for a woman to be a virgin meant that there was no doubt, no suspicion, no cloud, no haze, no even hint or shadow of questioning of who the father was of the children that she later bore. And that was important because, as I mentioned, the children are essentially his, not hers. The children are his heirs, not automatically her heirs. And therefore, his paternal line had to be as uncluttered as possible in order to be sure that his estate was going to his actual children. And virginity was, by and large, the best way of ensuring that. However, that didn't mean you only married virgins. It just meant that virgins, as we'll see, have a higher ketubah value when dealing with this issue and are treated in other ways, in slightly more deferential ways. But women who were not virgins were still given good treatment and were still given a good ketubah that would still allow them to live. The other, of course, reason why virgins get more than others is you're only a virgin once. Right? You only get married as a virgin once. And once that happens, unfortunately, there is
a new car.
It's like a new car, right? Yeah, we're going to try not to go too crass with any of our comparisons.
No, but the idea that is new only once. After you use at least 1 day, 1 hour, lost a lot of the value.
And who is the owner of that value? She is, right? So this is reflecting the reality from her point of view, which, yes, we can say that this is wrong and we can be smug and say, I can't believe that people would prefer to marry a virgin back in the ancient world, although DNA-wise it kind of sort of made sense, especially with their understanding of biology. But the fact of the matter was, people did. And that means if you're a virgin and you're about to get married, you want to make sure that you have secured for yourself the best possible ketubah before you get married, because you only get one shot at this. And if he decides in 2 years he doesn't want to be married to you anymore, or if he drops dead 2 years from now, you will never get as good a deal as you will today. So you have to maximize the protection, have to maximize your ketubah at this single moment in your life. And the rabbis knew that they had to be protected at that point as well. And that's why they set as a minimum a higher amount for the ketubah for women who were virgins than for women who were not.
But virginity is defined physically, right? Not actually by intercourse.
Let's wait until we get to that.
Oh.
We're not there to how we define virginity, but there definitely is a category of women who are virgins and a category of women who are not virgins. How we sort them into one category or the other, well, the obvious is very simple, but there is a gray zone, right? I mean, we can't be a little bit pregnant, but you can't be a little bit a virgin.
But the parenthood issue, okay?
Yes.
Many can work maybe for the first child, but not after that. And also, not always immediately. So you can be a virgin, but doesn't mean that the child is the child of that guy. Like after 6 months, like after more over a year of the marriage. So if the virginity was important for the parenthood, it's not a very strong case.
True. But who receives the double share of inheritance? The firstborn, right? So that first child is considered to be especially endowed by the Torah, and therefore you want to be especially clear on who the parent is. But you're right. There is no way, even with the first child, even of a virgin, to be sure that it was actually his, because who knows where she went at night and with whom she was intimate.
And it's not automatic neither. Maybe it can take a few months.
Absolutely.
And she's pregnant, so
it's
anyone. So the parenthood is a weak argument.
Well, it's a weak argument, but on the other hand, what other opportunities and ways are there to try and at least increase the odds that the parent will be the actual father that is married to the bride, right? It's not that it's an bulletproof vest that ensures that the children will be his, but it does at least add a little bit more probability that they will be. Plus, it is also an indication, at least as we're going to see, there are some gray areas, but there's also an indication that she's the kind of woman who has kept her virginity up till this point. And that means she is less likely, at least the assumption goes, to give away her intimacy after married as well. That if she was willing to protect her virginity and not fool around willingly with other people, we'll talk about unwillingly in just a bit, then, that gives you a better odd that she's not going to fool around, all the more so once she's actually married, and now adultery is a major crime, as opposed to premarital sex, which is no great honor, but it was considered shameful, but was not considered punishable by death, which adultery could, under certain circumstances, be punished. Okay, enough introduction. Like I said before, the next Mishnah we'll have to do a bit more introduction, but let's get at least one down on the table. Richard, do you mind?
Let's try. My nose is running. A virgin is married on the 4th day of the week, and a widow on the 5th day.
Okay, so first thing to point out is we don't follow this anymore, but we're going to see why they followed it in the ancient world, which is to say that every woman who was a virgin would get married on the 4th day of the week, right? That was the way it worked. What's the 4th day of the week?
Wednesday.
Yom Revi'i, exactly, Wednesday. So every virgin was having her wedding on a Wednesday, whereas if she was a widow, she was having her wedding on a Thursday. That was the standard wedding days for virgins and for widows.
So for widows better because it's day of the reading of the law.
Well, it's exactly for that reason, but vice versa.
Right.
So Richard, could you explain why this was so important if you were marrying a virgin?
Or twice in a week, courts sit in the towns on the 2nd day of the week and on the 5th day.
Right, the 2nd day of the week and the 5th day, also known as Monday and Thursday, which are the days we read the Torah.
Mm-hmm.
But it's also the day we read the Torah because that's when you had the market days, and that is why you had the court come to the town of those days, right? Because you wouldn't have the court sitting there every day of every week. You only have the court there when people knew that they could come and bring a case. Well, what kind of case might you have after a nice, happy marriage?
She got virgin.
Yeah, exactly right. So
that if he, the husband, had a claim as to the virginity of the bride, he could go early on the morning of the 5th day of the week to the court.
Okay, so boom. Why do we have virgins get married on Wednesday? So that he can wake up angry on Thursday and go to the court if he found that she was not a virgin the night before during their honeymoon. Because if you didn't do it that way, then who knows when he would be able to go to the court in order to handle this claim. Now notice we're going to work through this, but eventually we're going to find out that just because he claims she wasn't a virgin doesn't mean he's believed, or that she isn't believed. But there does need to be a reconciliation. Why does it need to be such a reconciliation? I mean, if you married her, you married her, yes, but he has entered into a promissory agreement, a lien against his property known as the Ketubot, and that lien is increased because of her virginity. So if she's not a virgin, then that was an erroneous transaction. It was based on false information, right? If I go to if you say, I need $3,000 to help me pay for medical expenses, and I say, well, here, yes, by all means, and then you go to Vegas, I'm going to take you to court for that, right? Because it's like, oh, hey, you gave me $3,000. It's like, I can do what I want with it. It's like, no, I gave it under the pretense that you were getting medical assistance, not that you had a lucky, number that you wanted to try out. So the idea that there needs to be a court available for this right afterwards, hopefully is understandable. And yes, that's not a great start to a relationship. Now, the one that we haven't spoken about is, why does the widow have a set day at all, right? I mean, she doesn't need to check for her virginity. She's a widow. Of course she's not a virgin. So why tell us that she needs to be married on the 5th day? Why not get married on Sunday, on Tuesday, on Wednesday, whenever you feel like? this is, according to other parts of rabbinic literature, in order to make sure that he actually has time to be with her. Because one of the things the rabbis were concerned with is if you marry a widow, you might not treat her with as much joy as you do your first virgin bride when you're young and all of that. And the rabbi said if you marries her on a Thursday, then come Friday, it's already like going to be a day off. And that means Saturday as well as a day off. So they at least get a few days to be together, right? Thursday, Friday, Saturday, he can actually rejoice with his bride for 3 days. Otherwise, if not, he might just say, okay, thank you, glad to be married, I'm off to work. And that just wouldn't be cool. So this way, widows also have a decent moment of celebration with their husband after getting married, even though they're not virgins. Make sense? Question? Or are you just looking ready for the next one?
I say the virgin gets 7 days off anyways, right?
Well, the virgin gets what's known as the 7 days of rejoicing, where we say the Sheva Brachot, the 7 days of blessing, which is taken from the case of Leah and Rachel, where Jacob had to wait 7 days before he married Rachel, the one he actually wanted. Very common misconception. He didn't work another 7 years and then marry Rachel. He married Rachel at the beginning of his next 7 years of indentured servitude. But he had to wait a week with Leah before he had the second wedding. And that week is one that we still honor. In some communities more than others, where you will have celebrations every day of the week for a full week. So that was already guaranteed to the virgin, but the widow, there was no guarantee that she would be getting that.
But the Shiva Barachot, the 7 days, was celebration to the new wedding, not the past wedding.
You mean for Jacob?
Yes.
No, that was officially the 7 days of celebration for his first marriage, meaning to Leah.
Leah.
Yeah.
Rachel didn't get 7
I
days.
thought that
I mean, he didn't want to, but that was the standard for the culture. Was you get married, you celebrate for a week.
Did Rachel get 7 days too?
It doesn't say explicitly in the Torah, but the assumption would be that she did. Okay. With that in mind, we now come to a topic that is going to get a little confusing. 3 years and 1 day old. This number matters when we're dealing with Ketubot, because the rabbis believed, and not exclusively, that is to say, many other ancient cultures believed as well, that if a child was under 3 years and 1 day old and was forced to have intercourse, that after that time, the physical signs of virginity would heal. Right? The idea was, in the ancient world, again, throughout the Mediterranean area and the Semitic world, not only within this part of Israel, that medically, that if you were 3 years and 1 day or under, right? So if someone, God forbid, abused a girl that was 2 years old, that the hymen would regrow, would reheal after that point. And therefore, her physical lack of virginity would not actually be still there by the time she was of marrying age. So very important to note, this does not mean the rabbis encouraged having sex with children under this age. Right? Well, I mean, you sort of look at me like I'm crazy. There are numerous anti-Semitic websites out there that use this and a few other places where they talk about this age limit as though the rabbis were encouraging this. Because what the rabbis tried to say was, if it was under this age, it should not be held as though the girl wasn't a virgin. And that's actually to the girl's benefit. It's not meant to be permission to have, abuse a child of this age. But like I said, there are unfortunately many anti-Semites who read passages like this totally out of context and will act as though this is somehow permission for pedophilia. And that is not at all what this is. And the understanding really is based off faulty medicine, a faulty science of their day, with the idea that the virginity would regrow, if you will. But that's an important point to keep in mind as we now move into Ketubot 1-2. And we'll talk about that probably more as we see the ramifications. Aaron, do you mind reading?
A virgin, her ketubah is 200
Zuz, 200 zuzim.
zuzim, and a widow, a manna, which is 100
A maneh, right. So
maneh.
if you are a virgin, you get 200. If you are a widow, meaning you definitely non-virgin, then you get 100. Those were the base amounts. Again, negotiation could change that, but those were the base amount that was set by the sages in order that you wouldn't have either virgins or widows who were of weaker families forced to have their daughters be sold without having the protection the ketubah was meant to give them. So they set limits, so to make sure that no one would be, like a minimum wage, if you will, so that no one would be taken advantage of at this point. So far, we understand? Okay, part 2.
A virgin who is a widow or divorced or a halutza from betrothal, her ketubah is 200 zuz, and there is upon her a claim of non-virginity.
Okay. How can you be a virgin who's a widow? Excuse me. So, or a virgin who is divorced, or a virgin who is a chalutza. Remember, chalutza is the Levirate marriage, meaning that she was married to somebody, they didn't have kids, he died, her brother-in-law didn't want to marry her, and so now she is free and gone through that ritual.
That's possible. The night of the wedding, the person have a heart attack.
So
before having intercourse, and that's it. She's married, but she's virgin.
a heart attack on the night of the wedding is absolutely a possibility. The other thing to remember is betrothal and the chuppah did not go together like they do nowadays. Right? Nowadays, we do that, right? The two events side by side. We do what's the ring ceremony is most famously seen. That is the betrothal. In the ancient world, you would do that, and then the husband would go off and prepare to receive his bride for a year, to get the party ready, to get his house ready, to basically get ready to become a married man. And that took time and it took resources to build up in order to be able to do that. And then she would show up, the year later, and then you would have the chuppah, and then everything would happen. But if he died after the betrothal, she is still considered a widow.
Why? If you're married only after the chuppah?
No. You get the privileges after the chuppah. You get the responsibilities before it. Well, some of the responsibilities before it. So if the woman has sex with a man, not her husband, after the ring has been given, she's committed adultery. That's considered adultery.
But she can have sex with the future husband after the
She cannot. So he gives her the ring, and they agree to get married. They're not supposed to have hanky-panky. No intercourse, right? Until the chuppah happens. And we're going to come to a case where that doesn't go like that. But that is the ideal, right? The betrothal happens, he goes off, they stay apart sexually for the intermediate time, and then the chuppah happens, and then they have sex for the first time.
Wait, did you say it's intercourse if you have, it's adultery if you have intercourse with your fiance, basically?
Yes.
Really?
Yes. I know in American law, we don't even treat the status of fiance as being much of anything, right? A fiance is like being a super boyfriend or a super girlfriend. But that's not historically how it's been treated, including within the US and within Western Europe. If you read Dickens' Pickwick Papers, there is a large section of that book taken up with an argument over whether or not he made a contract to get married with a woman. It's actually one of Dickens' better books. I highly recommend Pickwick Papers. But in American law and in those other places, the betrothal was considered to be a binding contract, and so too within Jewish law. And one way you know this is by even still at this point, if you propose to a woman and you give her a ring, and then you or she break up the engagement, what happens to the ring? No. Even to this day, under American law, he has the right to ask for the ring back. And she is supposed to return the ring. Now, a lot of people waive their right to that and don't make a fuss over it, depending upon the relationship and everything. But that ring is considered to be a token of betrothal. It is not considered to be a gift that was just freely given. It was for the purposes of marriage. If the marriage doesn't happen, the ring should return to the original person. I know it sounds weird because most Americans don't make a big fuss over this, except when they do. And when they do, it gets messy. So that was what that was considered. So yes, there are ways where you can be a widow, but a virgin. And it can be the untimely death of the husband. It can be the death of him during that intermediate period. But it is absolutely possible under especially classical Jewish cultural scenarios for a woman to be physically a virgin, but to be in the status where we would normally expect her to be married. We see how we got the gray zone here, right? She now has a title that screams, I've had sex, right? Because widows have sex, right? That's divorcees have sex. That's what you did while you were married. But we know from these cases that she didn't.
This one's a little off topic. If you got your fiance pregnant, though, the child would not be a mamzer, though, right?
No, the child would not be a mamzer. A mamzer is only from a prohibited relationship, not just one that's looked down on.
Oh.
So if you have adultery with some woman, then the child would be considered a mamzer. If you have incest, then the child would be considered a mamzer.
I thought you said if you had intercourse with your fiance, it was considered adultery.
No. If your fiance has an intercourse with someone other than her betrothed,
right,
it's considered adultery.
Oh, I thought you said all right. I thought you said if the fiance had intercourse.
Sorry, now have I said that? Sorry for the slip of the tongue. But no, it's if she has sex with someone other than her fiance while they're betrothed, then it's considered full-fledged adultery.
Right.
And dealt with exactly as adultery is dealt with.
But if you have intercourse with your own fiance, the only problem is you're now married, right?
Well, it's considered wrong and shameful and inappropriate behavior, but it's not considered to be a adulterous sin. Exactly. We're going to get to what happens if you have hanky-panky in the meantime in just another Mishnah or two. I'm trying to remember exactly which one it is. Well, we'll get there. Anyway, sure. So because she is a virgin in physicalness, but not a virgin in title, the question then is, what should her ketubah be? Should she get the virgin ketubah or should she get the non-virgin ketubah? Right? In name, she's not a virgin, right? An almanah, a widow, that's not a betulah. That is not a virgin, right? The term virgin has within it the implication of unmarried woman. And so therefore to call her a betulah doesn't seem right anymore. To call her a virgin doesn't seem right anymore. But on the other hand, we know, because of the way the scenario was built for us, that she is physically a virgin, right? She has never had intercourse. So what should...
Someone check her?
We're going to talk about how...
No, because if they didn't have intercourse, no one verified if it's true her claim that she's a virgin.
Well, so we're going to get to that in just a second, right? So the question of how do you prove virginity, because you don't go around like just having it on display, is going to become very important for this. I should point out that there was a general idea that a virgin would leave signs of her virginity on the wedding night. That is to say, there would be bleeding if she was actually a virgin. That was considered to be the most reliable form of information. But we're going to get to exceptions to that in just a second. But the basic question here is, we assume that this is the state because that's the legal category we've got here. We're not dealing with an actual person, we're dealing with a category. And the category is woman who has been married but not had sex. What do we actually count her as? And the answer is we count her as though she is a virgin. Right? Even though she is not a betulah in name anymore, we still count her as a virgin because physically she is, which means that the principle we can derive from this is they really are focused on the physicalness of the virginity, not just the title of being a betulah. Make sense? Okay, part 3.
A female proselyte, a woman captive, and a woman slave who had been redeemed, converted, or freed when they were less than 3 years and 1 day old, their ketubah is 200 zuz. There is upon them a claim of non-virginity.
Okay, so the idea is if you have a girl and she is less than 3 years old, right? That's the 3 years and 1 day limit they're talking about. And she is a convert, then we can say that she is a virgin. Now, if she's older than that, unfortunately, due to the behavior of the ancient world, we would assume that a girl who converted more than 3 years old had already been abused by the idolaters of the ancient world. And so too, a woman who was held so her into adult under Jewish law.
Hey, sorry.
Yes.
Why isn't that redundant then if they're referring to a slave to a non-Jewish person? Because how's that any different than a convert or something else?
Well, it's not that it's different than, but being redeemed, converted, or freed for the different. Sorry,
I thought if you were part
hold
of
on. It's the issue is a proselyte who's been converted, a captive who's been redeemed, a slave who's been freed.
right.
Right. No, I mean each verb attaches to one of the prior nouns.
So yeah, so it's so they were slaves. They were slaves to non-Jewish people. You're talking about, right?
Yes.
But isn't anybody who wasn't part of a non-Jewish? Oh, because it could be a Jewish girl who was slave.
Correct.
All right.
Yes, unfortunately. Okay, moving on to 1:3. Okay, now we get into more medical interpretations, as well as some other accidental ways that virginity can be lost. And then what is the status? So Yeraf, are you okay for reading?
Yeah.
We're on 1:3.
When an adult has had sexual intercourse with a young girl, or when a small boy has had intercourse with an adult woman, or a girl who was injured by a piece of wood, in all these cases, the ketubah is 200 zuz. The words of Rabbi Meir.
Okay, so we've got 3 different categories here. One of them is the one we talked about prior, which is if you have a girl that is under 3 years old and she has been abused by a man. The second is the reverse, which is to say you have a woman who has had sex with a boy that is 9 years or younger, according to later interpretation.
There's not to vote for male version.
There's what?
There's not to vote for male version.
But what is her status? She was a virgin, right? But he is having sex with her, even though he is only 9, which the presumption is will not, it doesn't count as proper sex, and it won't rupture the signs of virginity.
So the promise with her.
Yeah. This is all about her, because the ketubah is entirely based on her status, not his. So you have either a young girl who's been abused, you have an older woman who, for whatever reason, has had sex with a young boy, but one young enough to not engage fully in sexual intercourse by the definition of the ancient world. Then what is their status? As well as what is the status of somebody who has lost their hymen, but it was through accident. That's what the mukat aids, the what do they describe it? The injured by a piece of wood is describing. You know, it doesn't mean only that she was hit by a piece of wood, but if she was riding her dirt bike or going horseback riding or some other physical activities that sometimes, in certain cases, can cause the hymen to be lost without any intercourse having taken place.
Horse riding is very famous.
Yeah, horse riding is the most famous in most of our Western culture. But that's what they're describing here, is she hasn't had sex, but her hymen's gone, right? So what is the status in all of these? And you'll notice that Rabbi Meir says for all 3 of these cases, the ketubah is 200 zuz, which is the standard amount for a virgin, right? Let's get the sages, and then we'll see what they're arguing about.
But the sages say a girl who was injured by a piece of wood, the ketubah is emanate.
Right? So, but the sages say, okay, if it was a young girl who was abused, if it was an adult woman with a minor boy, she still counts as a virgin, right? The first case because it grows back, the second case because he couldn't have ruptured it, but the third case, the hymen is gone.
Yeah, but you cannot punish her for an accident.
So this is where we get into a question of, is the ketubah value going up or down a reward or punishment, or is it simply a descriptive tool of what is the current status?
For me, when you lose 50% of the value, it's a punishment.
Well, but it's also a question of how will the society work with regards to her, right? If you give the status of her as being 200 zuz and she has no hymen, why would I marry her as opposed to another girl who has a hymen that I would have to give the same ketubah to?
If you have two witnesses that can verify that it was an accident, it's
But wait,
the same level.
were they with her for every day of her life between when she
No.
lost it and you got married? Because once the hymen is gone, there's no way to prove she hasn't also had additional intercourse. So fine, maybe she lost her hymen horseback riding.
Yeah.
What did she do 5 days later? Right? What did she do a year later? What did she do 10 years later? How do you know she remained not sexually active once the hymen was gone? Because there's no more proof. And that was what they were concerned about.
But she can be a sexual active and still a virgin. She can do anal sex and still she has everything look like virgin, but she's not virgin.
Interestingly enough, in the Midrash regarding Rivka, where she is being introduced to the servant of Abraham, the Midrash specifically says that the girls in her world, in that area, would do exactly that. That they kept their virginity, if you'll excuse the terms, their vaginal virginity intact because it was more profitable for them. But they did everything else you could imagine with their bodies and boys because that didn't harm them in terms of their profitability. Judaism says there is only one type of virginity that actually matters for the ketubah, and that is the vaginal. So yes, it is possible for a person to be engaged in sexual acts, but they would not be classified as no longer being a virgin as long as their hymen were still intact. And that's why we have that middle case of an adult woman with a minor boy who it may or may not have even been willing or consensual, although I don't believe that it's possible for a boy to give consent at that young of an age, and that's why it's still considered child abuse to this day. But even imagining that they thought that it was consensual at the time under some delusion, she is not punished because she did that, because physically she is still considered and believed to be a virgin, even though she had sex with someone. So it isn't about, according to the rabbis, it isn't about rewarding or punishing. It's simply about, is she or isn't she? If there is a hymen, then it's 200. If there isn't, it's 100. And I absolutely agree that this is not the way we normally think about how to take care of this. That's because in the modern world, we have transferred most of our wealth into movable property and assets, which allows people to divide and share the property, and for women to own their own property, wealth property, in a way that is equal to men. And that means the status of the fatherhood of the babies and all of that does not have the same ramifications for the tribal distribution and allotment of land as it did in the ancient world. And that's why we handle divorce settlements in a very different way. It's why we handle widowhood in a very different way. And it's why the status of whether someone is a virgin or not a virgin, while still important to some, does not play a legally critical role for most people in the modern world. But that's not because we've gotten so liberal and we're open-minded and all of that. That's because our economy changed. And when our economy changed and women were given economic power, the status of them and their pregnancy likelihood and all of that became much less important or relevant in the modern world. That's, just as a slight tangent, one of the reasons why the birth control pill has been one of the most influential inventions of all of human history, because it fundamentally gave women a complete sense of control over their reproduction system, which has allowed them to have additional freedoms and power over their own lives that simply did not exist prior to that, even in a modern, more cash-based property system. And our modern reflections, it's not because we now value women more and we're all about romantic love and all of that, although some of that has happened. It's simply because the economy changed and it was no longer as relevant. 2,000 years ago, this was relevant, and this mattered for who's going to get the farm, right? Who's going to keep it in the family, and how do I know? And the only way we could at least stack the deck to know was through this one measure of physical intimacy, which is why the other non-pregnancy inducing forms of physical intimacy didn't count.
I have a question.
Only one.
Yeah, no, it's actually not, it's related, but not
Right.
directly. Some movies, you see women riding what they call side. Is this because of the chance of losing virginity?
Yes and no. So there were two reasons that the side saddle was common. One was because it was, well, I guess three. One was because of the question of virginity, that because riding it while astride could cause a rupture and you lose the hymen. The second was because it was considered inappropriate for a woman to be like this in public. No woman should ever do that. And third was because people were worried that a woman might enjoy the sensation, that the motion, the movement could be considered stimulating for women, and therefore they shouldn't have that pleasure. That should not be allowed. So those were really, as far as I remember from study, the three reasons why side saddle was so common. But the one that gets talked about the most is being ladylike, which is sitting sideways, and not astride the horse. But the other two were probably more relevant. All right, Ketubot 1:4. That's you.
A virgin widow, a divorced woman, and a woman who underwent haritz after marriage, their Ketubah is a man, and they do not have a claim of shame.
Okay, so if you are a virgin, right, but you are a widow, or you are a divorcee, or you are a chalutza, because after you've actually been married, you went to chuppah and everything, then again, you can still say she's being punished, but her ketubah is going to be a maneh, is going to be half of what it would have been prior to that. Now, we know she's a virgin, but she's now moved formally into the category of being non-virgin.
Yeah, but we saw in Mishnah too, in the same case, but before the chuppah,
Yes.
that she was obtained $200.
Yeah.
Now she's still virgin, the same physical situation, and you say it's not about punishment or reward, it's about the value of society, but still it's half of the value.
Because now that she has actually been married, she would not be considered that. Now, hold on. Before you get too worried about her, she did receive her ketubah from her first dead husband, right? Or she received her ketubah from her first widowed husband, or divorced husband. So she gets married, and then he drops dead, right? But they haven't actually had sex yet. She inherits. She claims the ketubah against him. She gets the 200 zuzim for being a virgin before they got married, and now she's going to get married to someone else, right? And along comes Mr. Smith, and he wants to marry her now too. And he says, it doesn't matter to me that your husband died on the wedding night. I want to marry you. And she says, oh, well, I'm still a virgin. And the rabbis say, yeah, but 100 is still the standard.
But she got the ketubah from the betrothal one too, right?
She got the, no, we're not dealing with like a case of three women here.
I mean, on 1-2, that she would have got the ketubah too.
In the last one.
Yeah, with the 1-2.
No, sorry, 1-2, yes. In 1-2, yes. But that she would
gets the 200 twice.
We're not dealing necessarily with the same woman.
Yeah.
Right. I mean, but technically, yes. If a woman got engaged and then he dropped dead, she would get the 200.
Right.
And then if she got married again and actually made it all the way to the chuppah and he dropped dead, she would technically get 200 again. But now any subsequent marriages are going to be at the 100 level, right? If she has anybody who wants to marry her.
Now,
which is the whole problem of Tamar in the Judah and Tamar story.
100 is a minimum.
Yes. Yeah, it can be
200
negotiated.
minimum, could be more than 100.
Absolutely. It can be negotiated.
She can negotiate and have also the 200.
Absolutely. Yeah, I mean, she can say, I know I'm 200, I know it says 200, but I want 400, right? Or I want 800, I want 1,000, 10,000. You know, whatever the market will bear, whatever she thinks she can negotiate. Or if she's from a very wealthy family and he's from a very wealthy family, the price may go up. It was not uncommon in different parts of Jewish history for men to show their devotion by putting enormous values in the ketubah, as being a way of saying, I love my wife this much, and giving a tangible marker of devotion. Money on the barrel.
Yeah.
All right. Mishnah 1:4, we just did the top one, now we need part 2.
A female or a captive and a bondwoman who were redeemed or converted, set free, more than 3 years and 1 day of age. The Ketubah is a money, and they do not have a clean opportunity.
Right, so we can realize that if they were older than this, then they are considered to be a priori, prima facie, not virgins. Right, because they come from situations where their virginity would have been presumed to have been taken by their captives, by their master, or by just the general idolatrous world of the ancient
Also,
times.
as he said, what happened when he's a captive in a Jewish family?
Well, Jewish families didn't hold captives.
Yes, slaves.
You mean if she was a slave within the Jewish?
And also was captive, yeah, that they need to cut all the hair.
Oh, you're thinking of captive from wars, but he had to marry her. He didn't keep her as a prisoner. You're thinking in Devarim when they talk about bringing home a woman from war,
Sure.
right? But he marries her. That's actually a very important
So what
point.
about slaves? You keep someone from the world as a slave.
So in addition,
That I did it.
Unfortunately, there were slaves, and there were often Jews who were sold into slavery, both to Jews as well as, unfortunately, to non-Jews. And the unfortunate reality of their world was they assumed that the slave world was a world of promiscuity, where people were very active, if you will.
So no matter if you are in a Jewish family.
Because it wasn't just about whether your master was abusing you, it was also whether other people were abusing. It just reflects the very unfortunate problems that happened in that kind of a situation in the ancient world. And one reason we should be grateful that we don't engage in this activity to this day. Okay, excuse me. I think we got time for one more. Let me just double check which one. Yes, yeah, 1-5 we can do.
Back to part 1 of 4. I assumed, I could be wrong, I thought the reason why it switched to 100 after you got married and 200 at the betrothal was because during the betrothal time there was no intercourse.
Well, yes.
And then after the betrothal, the presumption was you did have intercourse.
And that's that key word, presumption. All right, so even if she wasn't, because of that change of status, getting the Mrs. in front of her name, that now is more important than the physical condition that she has.
Right, so it doesn't have anything that they wouldn't believe her, or you just assume.
We're going to get to believing her not today,
Not today.
but we're going to get to her believing next week. Actually, thank you for reminding me. Next week, there is a Yom HaShoah program that I've been asked to participate in. And down at CRJ, being put on by the Holocaust Center. So there will not be class next Wednesday for Mishnah. Thank you for reminding me. I knew I wanted to say something. So yes, next Wednesday there will not be Mishnah class. Would you mind reading?
He who eats with his father-in-law in Judea without the presence of witnesses cannot raise a claim of non-virginity against his wife, because he has been alone with her.
All right, so you betroth the lovely lady, and then you are invited over to her house to, well, have dinner with the family, as well as get to know her. And this was apparently in Judea a very common custom. And once you've done that, however, you don't get to then say, she's not a virgin on the wedding night, because who's to say you weren't the one who took her virginity, right? Once you are alone with her, you don't have any ability of claiming that someone else must have done this.
So you pay 200.
Yeah, she would still be considered a virgin, because even if you know in your heart that you didn't do anything with her, sorry, the law doesn't know that. Right? That's why witnesses matter. So if you're alone with your betrothed, you're engaged, you know you're going to get married, that's only 1 more month. Do we really have to wait 1 more month? Come on, it's nice, it's romantic, the fireplace, blah, blah, blah. Right? We know what happens. You put young people together and you turn down the lights, and especially if they know they're going to be actually really legally fully married in just a little bit longer, the chances of them getting frisky are so high that legally we just say presumption. If she's not a virgin, it's your fault. Next time, have witnesses if you want to make sure.
It's almost like being married.
Well, a lot of people will act like that.
Well, I meant from the previous Mishnah.
Right. Well, it's if you've been around teenagers or young adults, in their early 20s, hormones are a really, really compelling part of their behavior. And you put them in that situation, you shouldn't be surprised with what happens afterwards. And in fact, we're so not surprised that we're not going to hear you argue that it wasn't you. Because, come on, chances are it was. And if you really had wanted to avoid being accused of that, have witnesses. Don't be alone with her. All right. And then part 2.
It is the same whether the woman is an Israelite widow or a priestly widow. Her ketubah is a nanette. The court of the priest collected for the virgin 400 zuz, and the sages did not protest.
Okay, so we're going to get a little bit of a differentiation here that needs to be explained. But first we get the sameness, which is to say, if she is the widow of a Kohen or she's the widow of John Doe, it doesn't matter. Her ketubah is 100. But if she is a virgin from the Kohen family, right, little Miss Kohen, she's the daughter of a Kohen, the Kohanim set a higher ketubah for their daughters than the rest of the community, and the court didn't protest. So meaning the rabbis, so the rabbis didn't set that as a standard, but the rabbis didn't stop the Kohanim from collectively making their own subgroup standard for the ketubah. So your question?
Why they have a higher? Because you have a free meat if you marry her?
Because they're Kohanim. Right, the Kohanim have, but the Kohanim have historically had a stronger desire to preserve their pedigree. It's been part of the Kohanic personality, the character, if you will. And in fact, that's one reason why you can nowadays say he's a Kohen, whereas the rest of us, you can't say he's from Issachar, he's from Zebulun, he's from anything, is because they were meticulous in maintaining who married in and who their daughters married out. That was something they were very, very strict about.
It didn't say it had to be married to another Cohen, though. If a female Cohen married whatever,
she can marry anyone.
She can marry anyone, but the Cohen status they lose the Cohen status, right?
She's it's complicated, but the short answer is she kind of loses it because it doesn't pass on to her children, right. But she also retains certain rights and privileges vis-a-vis her father's house. So that gets a little bit more complicated, but we'll have to leave it at there. We'll sometime talk about more of the Kohanic laws.
When we dealt with
when we were doing Moed Katan about death, we talked a little bit about that as well. But that is a much bigger subject of what happens to a Bat Kohen, the daughter of a Kohen.
I got from Rabbi Randall Kunitzberg, one of your colleagues. Well, actually, nowadays, somebody comes and says he's a Kohen, it's doubtful. You give him the benefit of the doubt.
Well, yes.
But actually, the more believable one is a Levite. He would say, I want to be number 2, I want to wash people's hands.
So indeed, there is a presumption that a Levite is slightly more believable than a Kohen, and that Kohanim are given the benefit of the doubt, but there is still doubt. And if you may remember when we were studying Mishnah last week on Wednesday, when we were just finishing up or not last week, the week before, we were just finishing up the section of Ediyot. We talked about when Elijah comes, he will bring in and push out, and some of the different opinions. The idea that the lineages were already a little suspicious of some people was already an issue 2,000 years ago. So yes, you can imagine 2,000 years later, the number of people who just showed up in a new village in Russia and said, yeah, I'm a Kohen, and their kids didn't know any better, and their grandchildren certainly didn't know any better, and their great-grandchildren assumed that they had no question to even ask. So the idea that maybe who's really a Kohen and who isn't a Kohen is a bit of a question mark nowadays. Yeah, that is a real question mark.
I heard, I don't know, I thought I read a DNA study that said 98% of the people who claim Kohen status could have the lineage traced back to the same guy.
So there is a DNA marker that is prevalent within those who are considered to be Kohanim. I have not heard the other way around, because I don't know that anyone has done a huge sample of Kohanim to see who might be lying. So if everybody who says I'm a Kohen and then they donate their DNA for the test, that doesn't tell you about a random sample of other people who claim to be Kohanim. You would have to go and get DNA from people who didn't volunteer for the study to find out whether or not it really was 98% accurate for all of them. But the idea that people who claim to be Kohanim and who are willing to be in the study did all share certain genetic markers, that does seem to indicate a very strong likelihood that they are indeed telling the truth and they are from a single male descendant.
So the 100, 200 shekel, or whatever is the value that the society gives to virginity or the woman?
The woman.
The woman.
But part of the woman's value is providing children. And virginity is a marker of what likelihood there will be of the children being that father's. So it's not that the society is putting a price tag on virginity. The society is saying a woman who was able to protect her virginity up until the point of being married has a value within the society of assuring that the next generation, well, or at least adding to our assurance that the next generation will be legitimate. And that was only a presumption, of course. As we know, adultery could happen and lots of other issues could come in. But this was a way of trying to say to women, don't just fool around, right? Because if you want to be better kept as a woman when your husband dies or when he divorces you, if you go into the marriage having shown a certain level of fidelity, of trustworthiness with your own body, then you will have more protection than if you have not. And then, of course, for your second, third, or fourth marriages, because unfortunately death was that common, you won't need as much to be maintained because you will still have that additional bonus from your first marriage. But yeah, for both men and women, were almost assumed that at least one of them would bury the other and remarry at some point in their life. The idea of having a spouse for 65, 70 years, like we sometimes have at TI, it just didn't occur in the ancient world. It was just almost inconceivable that you would be married to the same person. Not because you didn't love them, but because you would have buried like two people in that time period at least. Good?
I have a question
Yes.
about these amounts. How much are we talking about? Is that a lot of money, or is that enough to live on for the rest of your life? Or just
It's
curious.
generally considered, because the estimates are hard to figure out, because what is the purchasing power of 200 zuzim in the ancient world? But the general feel is that if you live an exceptionally modest lifestyle, that 200 zuzim would probably be enough to sustain you. You're definitely not living large, and don't go to Vegas and put it all in black. But you probably would be able to scrape by with 200 zuz for most of your life. And especially, of course, if you remarried, then that would be that would stabilize your finances considerably.
So if you remarry, the money go to the husband or still stay in the hands of the wife?
It depends. So when you get married, you can make a condition of what property remains for the bride who becomes the wife, and Anything that doesn't, then yes, is put into the family estate, which is under the husband's control. So if a woman wanted to stipulate, this money's mine, and no matter what happens with us, it's staying in the bank, that is perfectly fine as long as the husband is willing to accept it and get married on that condition.
So can the husband negotiate also the ketubah, say, okay, fine, you have the money, you don't need mine, so you know what, I will pay the rest.
They can negotiate, but not below the minimums.
No, of course.
Yeah.
See.
But she can't, I mean, she could say, I've got this money in the bank, but I also want 400 zuzim for you, and he can say, get lost. That's his prerogative as well. But that would be part of the negotiation.
Were these widows targets for robbers?
Not that I have heard of it. It's an interesting question. But the idea that they might have ready cash hanging out, I haven't heard of the idea of widows being especially targeted by thieves. So we don't have a whole lot of criminal records from that time period. It's not like medieval Europe where we can look at books of all the different crimes people committed. We don't have those types of records from 2,000 years ago. But interesting demographic survey. All right, good.